So welcome from my side to the webinar Just Transition in the Aviation Sector, Ways for Shifting Towards a Climate Just Transport System and the Role of Aviation Workers and the State. So my name is Magdalena Heuwieser. I will lead you through today's webinar that will last about 2 hours. As you all know, COVID-19 has led to a crisis for the aviation industry. In April 2020, there was a reduction by 95% in comparison to April 2019. So suddenly the skies were blue, citizens living close to airports could sleep quietly, companies needed to adapt to online working, and aviation employees had some free time or massive problems of unemployment. Same for touristic regions. So even though most airlines received enormous state-backed bailouts and with almost no social and environmental conditions attached, flights are on the rise again, and it will probably take some years to get back to business as usual. The question is, can we allow this business to go back to pollution as usual? For us as the state-grounded network, it's clear that the only way to tackle aviation's emissions is by reducing aviation. Aviation's emissions already account for 5 to 8% of global climate heating, and technological solutions are way too unrealistic or will imply other problems, which is why we say, okay, we need to degrow aviation. And we've been asking ourselves, how can this current situation be used to also in the long run limit flights, and how can this be done in a just way by taking into account the employees in the aviation and tourism sectors and the affected communities. And we're using the term just transition to describe this process, a term that has been first used in the trade union movement and now is used more and more in the climate justice movement. So this webinar will serve to understand better the current power balances, the perspectives from workers, trade unions, and affected communities. And it will serve to discuss among all of us some core questions. And the discussion today will be an important input for further steps we'll take in the network, including drafting a discussion paper on a just transition of aviation, and further discussions to follow with trade unions, employees, and affected communities, especially in the Global South. So we hope that this will be able to shift the discourse, like the plans we have, because the discourse right now is mostly when will aviation come back to normal, and to really shift it towards, okay, we need to transition towards a climate just transport system, and to also build pressure for real policy changes. So let's have a quick look on the agenda. So first we will hear an input by Alethea Warrington from Possible. She will give us an input of the state-grounded plans of this discussion paper. Then Todd Smith will present his perspective as a pilot and his feelings of general positions of industry workers. Then Tahir Latif from the UK trade union PCS will give an insight into trade unions discussions on a just transition of aviation. Then we have Darío Solano from the Fundación La Negreta in the Dominican Republic, and also being part of the Global Forest Coalition and the Dominican Forum of Cultural Tourism. And he will talk about what a just transition would mean for example, islands that are dependent on tourism and flights, and his perspective on what a just transition would mean for islands and yeah, the Global South. This will be an input in Spanish with an English translation. And then I hope we have Vicente Paulo Yu from the Third World Network with us to share his thoughts on what a just transition would mean for the Global South. But I think he hasn't shown up yet. So let's see. Okay, but first, I want to have a very quick impression of who's here in this webinar today. And I would ask a question in the chat, and you can all answer in the chat. So I would ask the question, then you would have a couple of seconds time to write something, and then I say go, and you can all click at the same time to see your messages. So the first question I have to you to know who is here is, where are you based at? Like which city and country? And yes, you can click go. Okay. We have lots of different cities. Berlin, Helsinki, Brussels, Epsom in South in England, Leipzig, Lisbon, Hamburg, Portsmouth, I don't know if I pronounce it well, London, Vienna, London, Portugal, Edinburgh, okay. But mostly Europe, I see. Okay, that's a pity, but still quite diverse. Then another question I have to you. What's your background? Are you here as an individual or as a representative of an organization, of an initiative? So please write it in here and then click go. Okay, trade union, state-grounded campaigners, former pilot, Atera, XR, Transport and Environment, the German group Am Boden bleiben. All right, thank you. The Global Forest Coalition. And then I have a last question to you, which is what's the, and you will have a few more seconds to think about an answer, so don't rush. What's the core question you think we should discuss today? Okay, you can click go if you already wrote something. So we have what future employment may exist in aviation. Mm-hmm. How to persuade workers that a just transition is in their interest. Mm-hmm. Unemployment in the aviation industry. How to make the transition sustainable. How to educate workers on a just transition. How to build support for demand reduction while protecting aviation workers. Raising public awareness of the need to take personal responsibility with carbon emissions from their travel, especially air travel. And the best strategies and who will benefit from a transition, public or private sectors. Okay, yes, very good questions, I think. I think we will have time to discuss these. And yeah, then let's get started with some inputs. We will have like 5-minute inputs from the speakers, and then you can ask questions of understanding. And afterwards, we will have a broader discussion. So, Ali, you're first on my list. Can you say a sentence about your work in the charity Possible in the UK? Like, what are you doing in terms of just transition in aviation? And then give us an overview of the plans of the state-grounded working group on a just transition.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Lena, for organising the meeting today, and I'm really excited to hear from all the speakers. So my name's Ali and I work for Possible, which is a UK-based climate action charity, and we work on areas including aviation. We're campaigning for a frequent flyer levy, We've also recently been campaigning against airline bailouts, and going forward, we're going to be working to try to undermine the false solutions which are proposed by the aviation industry, and to try to expose the gap between what they can actually do and what the industry is saying that they'll do. So to kind of support the narrative around demand reduction. So I'm going to just quickly run through the Just Transition discussion paper, which the Stay Grounded Network is planning, and the goal for this and the process by which this will be written. And then I'll go through the key questions which we'd like to discuss later in the webinar. So the goal for this paper is to push forward the discussion about degrowing aviation in a way that supports the livelihoods of workers within the industry, while also supporting the urgent reduction that we need to protect people who are being impacted by climate change. So keeping aviation demand within the emissions limits for 1.5 degrees would mean that most airlines are going to go bankrupt or change their business models. So jobs are going to change or disappear, or both. So in order to get public support for the reduction in aviation that we need, it's essential for just transition measures to be in place to protect workers' livelihoods during that period. I think this, this discussion paper is coming at a really important moment because of the COVID crisis. And in the UK, at least, there's been a lot of negative attention from airlines' plans to make mass redundancies and to push staff onto worse contracts. And I think it's really exposed how badly airlines are treating their staff, and there's a lot of public support for airline workers. So it's a good moment for this. So the paper is going to think about how to degrow aviation while supporting airline workers, how to support impacted communities, and also the role of the state and ownership in the transition. So in terms of the process for producing this paper, after this webinar, the working group is going to meet to talk about the issues that were raised in the webinar and decide on the structure of the paper. And then there's going to be a first draft produced with different people writing different sections of the paper. And then there's going to be feedback loops where the working group will take the drafts back to the Stay Grounded Network and to experts such as trade unions, and there'll be a round of feedback and edits. And then there's going to be a document produced for publication, and it's been discussed whether we'd want to ask airlines or aviation companies to respond to it. And then there'll be a public release with press events such as a webinar and a press release to kind of publicize the paper. So there's some key questions which Stay Grounded would like to discuss today, which Lena will also go through when we get to the discussion section of the meeting, but just so people can kind of start thinking about them now. I'm going to be asking what you think the role of state ownership should be in a just transition. Obviously, there's kind of advantages and disadvantages of state ownership compared to private ownership for a just transition, which would be really great to get people's thoughts on. So on the one side, there's the idea that the state can manage the aviation industry as it shrinks in size. But then there's also concerns about kind of nationalising the losses as the sector shrinks after the profits have been privatised for years. How do you ensure that citizens aren't bearing the risk or the financial loss? And there's also questions of how you ensure the public has democratic control. So if the industry goes into state ownership, does that increase democratic participation in the transition? Is there any other option apart from the current model of private airlines and full state ownership, or what other kinds of ownership would be feasible? And it would also be good to think about measures to support aviation workers into lower carbon sectors, or other ways to support workers' livelihoods as jobs within aviation shrink. How can aviation workers and their unions best be involved in deciding on support measures? If anyone has any good practice examples of transitions in other industries, that would be really interesting. We'd also like to think about how we avoid being Eurocentric and how we ensure the transition is fair from a North-South perspective, and takes in countries' different historical responsibilities for aviation emissions, and also thinking about a just transition for countries dependent on tourism as well. And yeah, just to add as well that Possible recently published a report that was a joint position with trade unions on how to minimise job losses in aviation during the COVID crisis. And Tahir is going to talk more about the union perspective, but we were calling for state support to go towards helping aviation workers to go into other sectors, rather than just being unconditional handouts, which actually didn't happen in the end. In the UK, we didn't get conditions to protect the climate or to protect workers. Airlines just got basically free money. But the report was kind of like a step forward in getting coordination and a joint position between the climate movement and the labour movement on aviation degrowth, which hadn't happened previously. And it's obviously really important for climate campaigners to work with the labour movement on issues like aviation degrowth, which are going to affect employment patterns. And yeah, we're really keen to make use of the new public awareness about aviation and climate and employment and how to protect workers as the industry changes and demand shrinks, to see what yeah, like what further agreement there can be in terms of how to protect workers while also cutting emissions to protect the climate.
Thanks a lot, Ali, for this overview of this process of a just transition discussion paper and the content and questions. We have the questions actually also on the slide, but we will show them afterwards for the discussion again. Are there any questions of understanding now? Not like questions for discussion, but rather things you didn't understand you would like to hear again? Okay.
In case you have questions, mark it with a star in the chat. But if there are no questions, that's also fine and shows that it was a very concise presentation. Since we have also for the next presentations, I think no slides, please be reminded again to speak slowly so that everybody can understand clearly.
Thank you. All right, then let's go on with Todd. So welcome, Todd. Thanks for joining this webinar. Could you briefly tell us about your personal experience as a pilot and the contradictions you faced when you started joining the climate justice movement? And tell us also about like the situation and positions of aviation workers, in your insights in there. What do you think could help organize a just transition and get in dialogue with workers?
Awesome. Thanks very much, Lena. Thanks for hosting the meeting, and yeah, for everyone for attending. And yeah, it's just nice to hear the progress from Ali's side as well. So yeah, my name's Todd. I've wanted to fly since I was 5 years old. I grew up on a a working class family, and my whole family got together, remortgaged a house to help me achieve my dream. I spent 7 years training to be a pilot just off the back of the 2008 recession. And yeah, having spent 3 years flying airliners, I actually lost my medical about 2 years ago, and that was the first time it gave me an opportunity to, you know, look at the climate science and understand what was really going on. And yeah, it was an incredibly difficult process for me to realize that actually the one goal I set out to achieve from such a young age, now I didn't feel was morally acceptable to continue in that industry. So I had this huge conflict of, you know, still owing my parents £100,000 and you know, wanting desperately to continue as a pilot because I'm passionate about that job, but at the same time realizing that, you know, the climate and ecological emergencies goes way beyond my job title, and speaking to other pilots and trying to confront, you know, just open conversations with colleagues who I'd met in training. And, you know, I was often just like a black sheep and getting shut down by some of the guys who just didn't want to hear it. And, you know, eventually I had to leave a WhatsApp group, which I created 7 years ago, just because, you know, some people like climate deniers just weren't prepared to listen. So yeah, thankfully I got in touch. I saw the Stay Grounded campaign, and I'm quite involved with Extinction Rebellion now as well. I've made the conscious decision that, you know, I could no longer fly passenger jets. You know, if I can get a job flying scientists or, you know, medical evacuation work, then fair enough. But yeah, you know, that's been my experience, and slowly we've started this small group of airline workers called Destination 1.5, and you know, we're having some really open discussions in there. People at different stages. The problem with aviation is, you know, people are not able to speak out publicly unless whilst they're still part of that industry. You know, they can't really speak to media or speak openly and honestly about their climate concerns, because it's not seen, you know, it's not, at the moment, there's such powerful lobbies in the industry that even the pilots, you know, don't understand the enormity of the challenge which faces the industry. I feel like a lot of the pilots I speak to are, you know, conflicted. They might have an awareness that aviation is bad, but then they go and Google instantly, they see that it's just 2% of global emissions without doing any further research. They might come across a greenwashing campaign of some description, and then that settles their nerves, and you know, it's just so easy to bury their heads in the sand. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and you know, for me, a just transition would be, you know, just, you know, all this in 2008, all these bailouts happened, and, you know, the money ultimately just goes to the board and the shareholders. After the bailouts happened, the pilots' terms and conditions are reduced, which is exactly what's happening now. We've got these hire and fire policies, and left, right, and centre, the airlines are just jumping on to try and reduce the terms and conditions. And then pilots get made redundant ultimately a year or two later, and you know, even the airline can go into administration. So that's exactly what happened in Thomas Cook, who I used to fly for. They had a merger in 2008, and they went into administration in September last year. So I feel that the only way we can really appeal to pilots right now, airline workers on the whole, is to help them understand why, by tackling the climate issue and the just transition, we can also improve the protection for the workers. And, you know, I think the biggest challenge is educating the workers that even if the industry didn't contract because of, you know, the climate concerns, through automation and technology, you know, the airline bosses are trying to save money left, right, and centre. So Airbus have just tested, you know, automatic takeoff and taxi aircraft. They're ultimately looking for fully autonomous aircraft. So, you know, pilots especially are no longer really seen as assets, and we just need to help educate people and, you know, make those links as to why it's a good thing and how ultimately they can, yeah, have stronger protection. If they agree to a just transition, there's this big Facebook group that's been set up with 19,000 pilots in Europe at the moment, and they allowed me to post a campaign video on there. But so far they're very hesitant if we're just talking about climate change. So yeah, we just need to try and appeal more from the perspective of the terms and conditions. But yeah, COVID is a particularly challenging time. And I think most people are just really concerned about getting back into a job. And I believe there's a large percentage of pilots that understand that, the way that we've been flying has to change and the narrative has to change. And I think it's just appealing to them. And, if we get help from the government to be re-educated into a lower carbon sector and make a list of, what transferable skills we have and what industries would be most suited for us to move into, then perhaps it would be much more accessible or appealing for pilots that have clearly devoted a lot of time and money to this career. But yeah, I would say just on the whole, education and raising awareness and working with airline workers to understand their needs and would be the best way forward. But yeah, I think certainly so far the unions are just set on job preservation. In our group Destination 1.5, we're hoping to get enough members that we can write a letter to the unions and make a lobby in that sense and create some impact, because we need the unions on board. We need them to be pushing and recognizing that this is just a bigger threat, if not a bigger threat, to our industry, given that there are no green alternatives and we have to reduce the amount of aircraft in the sky, full stop. So thanks again for asking me to come.
Thanks a lot. This was really interesting. It sounds a bit, not very optimistic though, because there's so much work still to be done. There was the question, which is the link or name of the mentioned Facebook group. I guess it's not the Destination 1.5 Facebook group, but the pilot one. I'm not sure, Carla, which one you meant. If you have a link for that group, you can maybe post it in here, but I guess it's only open for pilots. Okay, are there any questions of understanding? If not, then we will continue with Tahir Latif. Tahir, you will, I guess, talk about something similar, but now from a union perspective. You're the representative of the aviation workers in your trade union PCS, Public and Commercial Services Union. I think it's one of the four biggest, or three biggest trade unions in the UK, five biggest, okay. Could you give us an overview of the internal discussions inside the trade unions, also the more conservative ones? Do they discuss a just transition and how? And are there actually also some steps taken? It's not only discussions, but also already some steps that would go into this direction. Yes, please.
Okay, well, thank you, Lena, and thank you to yourself and Mira for both organising and asking us to speak, and to everyone for attending. I think you're absolutely right, because the things that both Ali and Todd have said both feed into exactly what I wanted to say as well. And Ali will know very well that we do have difficulties in terms of trade unions in the UK in going beyond just the job preservation, or the preservation of jobs as they are at the moment, exactly the point that Todd made in his contribution. I mean, the fact is, we do live in the orthodoxy is that aviation is presented as being crucial to the success of an economy. And so government's aim is to get the industry back to where it was as quickly as possible. And in the UK, this is called the Restart and Recovery Programme, which I think those words tell you a lot about what the government's priorities are. And of course, insecure workers want to go back to their jobs as soon as possible because of the situation that they've been in over the last few months. You mentioned, Lena, that the time it will take to get back to pre-pandemic traffic levels. There's a range of estimates. I think most of them are in the range of 2 to 5 years. Now, in that time, automation of jobs and changes in processes will mean that not all of the jobs that we have today, or that we did have a few months ago, will return. So there's already a cloud hanging over workers even before you get to climate issues. And that's why all the UK aviation unions, even those who are pro-expansion, are pushing the government for job protection and for retraining and redeployment. And the possible report that Ali referred to actually codified that in a report form and made those demands, which we're really pleased about. The emphasis, of course, on retraining and redeployment being on meeting the UK's climate targets. So there's an opportunity there. The door is kind of half open for doing more. If we factor in whether we actually want to return to previous traffic levels, which of course we don't. Simplistically speaking, if we don't return to those traffic levels, then the loss of jobs in the form that they were in previously or are in at the moment, the loss of those jobs will be even greater. So we need to use the current situation to extend the demand for retraining and redeployment, not only for those jobs that will be lost to automation, things like that, but also on the basis that traffic to return. We've put the mechanisms in place to give those workers jobs in the effort to decarbonise our society. But we do have to recognise that such an ambition, it depends on the level of planning and coordination, and it raises issues about ownership. Bailouts are not the answer. They might be an answer, but only if we wanted to return to what we had before. Private companies only do the thing that they do. So bailouts can only help them to return to doing that and not anything else. For workers, bailouts might help some through this period and to go back to their old jobs, but as already said, not all those jobs will return. Employers know this, and even while they're taking taxpayer money, they are, as he said, also seeking to make many workers redundant in the industry. Similar issue goes for so-called green strings. I mean, making bailouts conditional on taking action on emissions. The scope for doing that is really limited in the kind of industry that there is at the moment, because aviation is very segmented, airlines, airports, air traffic, etc. So even optimistically, with the willing participation of those companies, they can only do their little bit of what is actually needed, like recycling and electric vehicles and those sort of things. None of those companies can individually address the issue of the whole industry and its relation to the environment. And that's the shortcoming of organising it in that particular way. So for many workers, bailouts are just a delay until redundancy in effect. What we really need is to use the money to employ workers in alternative jobs. Unlike the UK Lucas Plan workers in the 1970s, we don't need to sit down and make a list of what we think forms socially useful production. We already know what needs to be done. We need to restore social and public services that are needed by the most vulnerable and that have been cut over the last 40 years. We need better, well, as we've learned in these last few months, we need better preparation and organisation to deal with a pandemic, including medical care and equipment needed. And of course, there's the huge range of work needed to combat climate change. In aviation alone, we can categorise new jobs in several ways. So restoring the jobs that were cut previously that contributed to the safety and environmental efficiency of flying. More jobs in aviation to implement better routes, deliver technical fixes, provide green transport links, and implement and collect new tax regimes. So all sorts of jobs actually within aviation, from actually managing demand down, but also transferring of jobs to other modes of transport, such as rail, as part of an integrated and coordinated approach to transport. And of course, we can create the climate jobs needed in other areas like housing, education and health to clean up the environmental mess that we have already made. Some of those will call on existing skills of workers, some will require adaptation of skills and others will need retraining. But actually the number of jobs is huge if the political will were there, but it requires a level of coordination that capital just won't give you. So we need to demand alternative forms of ownership. You alluded to this earlier, Lena. Collective public ownership, workers' control and decision-making. I mean, they're the experts in the industry. Local democratic accountability and so on. I mean, that's the source of long-term job security. The point you made, Todd, about pilots is very well taken. I mean, from my perspective, working for NATS, National Air Traffic Services, the ATCOs very much mirror that kind of sense of being the skilled workers in the industry and therefore having some kind of divine right, which then is challenged by the model that they were moving towards at the moment. Finally, then, just to finish off, I have to say that aviation is international, so we do need to meet it with international solidarity. Our employers will tell us that if we don't expand Heathrow, then Schiphol or Frankfurt will beat us in the competition. We have to reject that logic and recognise that to oppose one expansion is to oppose every expansion and lead to a better future for all. So thanks for listening and solidarity to everyone.
Thank you, Tahir. Yes, it's refreshing to hear such a trade union perspective. But I suppose that you're also one of the most progressive voices inside the UK unions.
That's sad to say, but true. I wish it wasn't the case.
Yes. Well, are there any questions of understanding for Tahir? Maybe it was a bit quick sometimes. Did you lose anything? Would you like to ask something specific again? Okay, if not, then we will move on to Darío Solano. So now we have had this focus on mostly work and trade unions, and we will now shift to another topic. Other people who in communities who could be who are affected by reduced aviation, the tourism sector mostly. And Darío, you live in the Dominican Republic, an island state, so most tourists come by plane, and the Dominican Republic is very much like its economic model is very much also reliant on tourism. So I would like to ask you, as the director of the Fundación La Negreta and a member of the Global Forest Coalition, which is also a member of the Stake Grounded Network, and as a coordinator of the Dominican Forum of Cultural Tourism, what role does tourism and aviation play in the Dominican Republic? Which negative or positive effects does it have? And is there a debate in the environmental movement about how to transition the economy and society towards a more sustainable and just model? So I think you will speak in Spanish and Diego will translate. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody.
Entonces, I will just repeat the question in Spanish. Darío, ¿qué rol juega el turismo y la aviación en la República Dominicana? ¿Qué efectos positivos o negativos tiene? Y hay un debate en su o en otros movimientos ambientales sobre maneras de cómo transicionar la economía y la sociedad hacia un modelo más sostenible o justo.
Bueno, buenas, encantado de poder participar con ustedes para compartir la situación de la República Dominicana en términos del turismo y la aviación. Y agradezco infinitamente a Diego que va a poder hacer la traducción al inglés.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to talk about the situation in my country, Dominican Republic, and I'm happy that thanks, Diego, for translating.
En este momento, la sociedad dominicana atraviesa por un periodo de incertidumbre por el impacto que ha tenido el COVID-19 frente a todo lo que es las áreas económicas del país, sobre todo su impacto en el turismo.
At the present time, the country is under some financial stress, mainly due to Corona, but it's been affected in terms of jobs and also health.
El modelo de desarrollo en la mayoría de los estados insulares, en el Caribe y particularmente República Dominicana, depende mucho del turismo y de la aviación.
Most countries in the Caribbean depend on the aviation sector for their economic, their economic depends on the aviation sector and tourism in general.
La República Dominicana es líder en turismo a nivel de la región del Caribe en términos de habitaciones.
The Dominican Republic is the #1 country with the highest amount of hotels in the area.
El turismo tiene un gran efecto en términos de creación de empleos
Tourism provides a lot of jobs
y de producción de divisas.
and the creation of bringing money into the country.
Sin embargo, a pesar de la importancia que tiene el turismo en la República Dominicana para su desarrollo económico, es una actividad que no guarda una relación en términos de desarrollo sostenible.
Despite these factors, the aviation sector and tourism brings a lot of negative consequences to the country too.
Paradójicamente, en los sectores donde se desarrollan los polos turísticos, presentan toda una serie de indicadores de pobreza.
Unfortunately, the areas that depend the most on tourism in the country have all of them negative symptoms or have negative impacts due to the aviation sector.
La industria turística recae fundamentalmente a multinacionales.
The tourism sector, unfortunately, depends or relies on multinationals, large corporations.
No obstante a eso, en el Plan Estratégico de Desarrollo de la República Dominicana al 2030, se cifra que en el turismo es la pieza fundamental conjuntamente con la minería para el desarrollo económico.
However, on the National Plan for Sustainability for 2030, tourism and mining are the two main economic sectors.
Para el movimiento ambiental, incluso para los expertos en biodiversidad, entienden que el turismo representa un gran peligro a todo lo que es la biodiversidad y la degradación de los suelos.
The biodiversity experts are clear that tourism has a huge impact on ecohabitats and the soil in the area.
Es algo que de manera increíble las autoridades dominicanas han planteado que para el 2022 la República Dominicana esté recibiendo unos 10 millones de turistas.
So the country is expecting around 10 million tourists by 2022.
Pasamos a la segunda ficha.
Yeah.
Aquí podemos a la cantidad de pasajeros, o sea, estamos hablando que ahora en el 2019, la evaluación del 2019, 7.184.418 pasajeros pasaron por nuestro país.
In 2019, the statistics show that more than 7 million passengers entered the country by plane.
Unos 116.391 vuelos se realizaron.
There were 116,000 total flights.
La próxima ficha. En términos de la sustentabilidad, de hecho, o sea, en el movimiento ambiental hay niveles de preocupación y reflexión en términos de lo que es el impacto que está desarrollando la industria turística para con las áreas protegidas.
The environmental movements in the country are very worried about the development of the tourist and aviation sectors.
Además de eso, de que los beneficios que genera el turismo no tienen un impacto en la calidad de vida de la población dominicana.
Nonetheless, the benefits that come from the tourist and aviation sectors in the country usually don't end up benefiting the people that live there, the communities.
En los actuales momentos en República Dominicana hay 8 aeropuertos.
In the Dominican Republic, there are currently 8 airports.
Que nosotros entendemos que es un exceso.
Which he believes it is too much.
Lo que pasa es que estos aeropuertos responden a intereses de grupos empresariales, en este caso del sector turístico.
And these airports rely or depend on economic interest or business interests, and in this case, in particular, the tourism and aviation sectors.
En la pasada semana, de manera sobre la base de acciones cuestionables y de corrupción, se acaba de aprobar un nuevo aeropuerto.
Unfortunately, thanks to the corruption of the government, a new airport has been pushed forward and will be built.
Es de hecho que el turismo y aviación en este momento representan un gran desafío para el desarrollo de la República Dominicana.
Actually, the tourist and aviation sectors are a real challenge to the development of the country.
Sin embargo, es un tema que hay que tratarlo con mucha claridad y por los niveles de sensibilidad que genera.
Nonetheless, it is a very delicate topic that must be treated very cautiously because people are very affected by it.
La discusión muchas veces tiende solamente a hablarse de la capacidad de generación de empleo.
As always, as in everywhere in the world, the debate usually turns around the idea of job creation,
Más hacia allá de los efectos negativos que genera.
without taking into account the negative effects of the work itself.
De antemano, el turismo se va en una planificación sostenible, pone en riesgo los recursos naturales y la estabilidad del ecosistema en la República Dominicana.
If the tourist sector is not thinking about its impacts, then it puts at risk ecohabitats and the communities in the areas.
En los presentes momentos, el movimiento ambiental ha tenido que responder y enfrentar situaciones de utilización de área protegida para el desarrollo de complejos hoteleros, como el caso de Globalia.
Lately, the environmental movement has been faced with companies such as Globalia, a hotel resort that want to build a hotel in a natural reserve area.
Uno de los momentos de resistencia justamente del movimiento ambiental están en esos dos niveles, tanto de la defensa de las áreas protegidas como también de cuestionar el otorgamiento de la licencia para la construcción del presente aeropuerto.
Right now, the two biggest points from the climate movement in the country are to fight against allowing hotels to establish themselves in protected areas and allowing the construction of a new airport, knowing its effects and impacts.
Por lo tanto, espacios como este son de vital importancia para expresar solidaridad frente a lo que va a ser la lucha del movimiento ambiental dominicano.
For this reason, spaces like this, like today, are a place where the solidarity can be shown across different movements to fight.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Dario. I think this was very important to hear this because I have the feeling that always in discussions here in Europe, I often hear, yes, yes, climate change, but we have to allow the countries in the global south, the developing countries, to grow and to basically walk the typical development process, and it's their right to do that. And then actually what is not seen is that there are also environmental movements, climate justice movements, indigenous peoples and farmers movements who also fight those dominant developments and the negative effects of, for example, aviation and tourism. Just like here, the dominant answer is still economic growth, while there are groups struggling against it. So yes, it is key, I think, to show this global solidarity and try to push for a just transition on a global level. Okay, so are there any questions of understanding?
Hay una pregunta. En este momento, en el área del Parque del Este, donde se quería hacer el complejo hotelero de Globalia, que es el operador más importante de España, la comunidad local ocupó el espacio.
And that currently, somebody asked the question in the chat, and I think he's replying to it. He says that currently on the east of the country, Glovalia, the Spanish luxury or resort, hotel resort, we're planning to build a hotel in this area of the country, and some members of the community occupied the area where this resort was supposed to be built.
Y en el caso del movimiento ambiental organizado, sometimos un recurso de amparo a la justicia, a los tribunales nacionales, demandando su paralización y un amparo frente al Ministerio de Ambiente y la misma compañía Globalia.
The environmental movements in the Dominican Republic have asked the local courts to stop or to take back the license to construct this resort at the protected area.
El tribunal ha fallado paralizando hasta tanto se cuenten con todos los estudios técnicos, paralizando la obra.
¿Quiere decir que está de acuerdo o que está en contra?
El tribunal falló a nuestro favor y ha decidido paralizar el desarrollo del hotel.
Yeah, the courts have agreed with the petition, and they have paralyzed the construction of the hotel.
Ha sido una victoria momentánea.
It's a short-term victory.
La intención nuestra es que no sea la paralización de la licencia, sino que haya una sentencia definitiva porque viola todos los preceptos legales y la normativa ambiental.
The aim is not to have a temporary paralysis or stop to the license to construct, but to actually stop and halt the project completely.
Y en el caso de la construcción del aeropuerto es una decisión de esta semana, por lo tanto, en este momento lo que estamos tratando de construir coaliciones, pero tenemos de desventaja de que el país entra a un proceso de transición gubernamental.
The decision will be taken this week, but unfortunately there were elections recently and they're just going through a transition of power from the old government to the new government.
Ha sido esa situación que inclusive creando un precedente, es la primera vez que se autoriza la construcción de un aeropuerto a través de un decreto presidencial y no a través de la autoridad competente.
It is the first time in the history of the country that the approval of the construction of an airport is achieved through a royal decree and not through the appropriate legal procedures, usually from the ministry.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. There's a question in the chat.
Yes, exactly. From Sarah Clayton. So Sarah, if you don't want to raise it yourself, I can read it out. Let's see. If you want to.
You're very welcome to read it.
Sorry?
You're very welcome to read it.
Okay, all right, I will read it. So Sarah, you ask, do we need to discourage countries in the global south from being so dependent on tourism from the rich west? It is not a sensible future strategy. Wildlife tourism in Africa paid for much of the conservation work. That is now at risk. Depending on rich Westerners is not a safe way to plan for the future.
Do you want to translate? Or?
Yes, maybe you can quickly translate it for Darío.
Okay. Darío te pregunta si deberíamos de hacer que el sur global deje de depender del norte global, sobre todo depender de su turismo. Pone el caso, ella cree que es una estrategia muy delicada, y pone el caso de África, en el que muchos safaris han dependido durante años del turismo del norte global para poder luego con ese dinero cuidar las zonas y sobre todo las especies protegidas y asegurarse de que no sean matadas y luego vendidas ilegalmente en mercados.
Yo pienso que en el fondo lo que hay es una concepción de modelo de desarrollo.
Okay. For him, it's... ¿Me lo puedes explicar un poquito mejor?
O sea, en el fondo, en el sur tenemos que replantearnos los modelos de desarrollo.
Okay. Yeah. In the south, in the global south, he believes that we need to rethink how are we going to develop, or how are they going to develop.
La visión del turismo como un eje fundamental del desarrollo del Caribe no necesariamente surge en el Caribe, sino que es impuesto a partir de modelos que se definen desde el norte.
Yeah, the tourism model that thrives or that exists in the global south is often imposed by the global north.
O sea, pienso que necesariamente tiene que entrar en discusión el modelo de desarrollo y los actores como tal.
We need to talk about the model of development, but also who are the main actors involved in this.
En el caso de la República Dominicana es una economía que depende de lo externo, o sea, de turismo, de las remesas que mandan los dominicanos del exterior y las empresas multinacionales.
In the case of the Dominican Republic, it economically depends on tourism, the money sent back by Dominican republics all over the world, and the impact or the economic activity of multinationals. So it's all from the exterior.
Por lo tanto, también tiene que haber un enfoque de esas posibilidades de identificar nuevos nichos de desarrollo, siempre y cuando los sectores de la oligarquía no manejen todo lo que son las decisiones.
So they need to see what's their niche, and they need to think about who the power the oligarchy has and how to minimize this.
En este momento, ese modelo de turismo de todo incluido es lo que se plantean nuestras autoridades y tienen muy pocas opciones, sobre todo en este momento de incertidumbre.
The all-inclusive model is what the authorities of the government is pushing for, but this has little positive impact in the communities.
En este momento el debate en la prensa está situado sobre la apertura del turismo que inició el día 1 de julio.
Right now, the debate on the press is about the amount of tourism that has come to the country since the opening, or since the corona relaxation measure. So since the corona has allowed the tourism to restart, and it was on the 1st of July.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are now already sliding into the discussion, and that's fine because I haven't seen Vicente joining us yet. So I think we will not be able to have the last input. So I think it's great that we already started the discussion, and there was already some arguments like, does it really make sense to reduce tourism, and which kind of development model should there be in the global south? So maybe if you want to add on this discussion, please feel free to raise your hand. I think it's better to raise your hand and have the real discussion than have it in the chat, because it makes it more lively. So maybe Tahir, do you want to just quickly say something, and then Ali?
Yeah, sure. So yes, I know I put it in the chat since other people were talking, but essentially it's the fact that it is a very exploitative relationship between the North and the South, in the sense that I completely understand Dario's point about wanting to move away from tourism as the basis for the economy, because it is so exploitative, but it also impacts on us at this end in Europe, where the huge airport expansions are based on, and opening up links to those kind of countries. You know, you think of the BRIC economies and places like that Brazil, Russia, India, China, is about saying that those are the markets of the future. So we want to open them up for exploitation. And that's where the expansion of aviation is looking. I think this is quite a destructive relationship in for both parties. In that sense, we need to move towards something a bit better.
Ali, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Tahir. That's a really, really important point, and that it's difficult for countries to move away from tourism if their other economic options have been depleted by these really unfair and unequal global power structures. Just, it'd be really great if we could also include in the report like some consideration of how like countries which are being damaged by tourism and also depend on it are also going to be impacted by the effects of climate change. And obviously that's a really, really difficult problem to solve because this requires such like widespread economic change, but it would be really interesting to include it.
If you want to raise your hand, please write a star into the chat. Yes, Todd.
Yeah, some great points there. If I could just add that I'm advocating for Kate Rayworth's donut economic model, and currently I'm working with the Donut Economic Action Lab, which is going to be fully live from mid-September. And I understand Costa Rica is already using the model to be a fully regenerative nation, the world's first. And yeah, for me, it offers a lot of hope in the way that countries can organize their economy and make sure that they can thrive, but still within the planetary boundaries, and they are self-sufficient, and things like tourism could be considered. So yeah, it'd be quite interesting to maybe start having those conversations with the deal as well.
Thank you, Todd. Steve, via phone, has raised his hand. Steve, please go ahead.
Yeah, Todd beat me to it there. I wanted to ask Dario what he thought of the Costa Rica model. Although they seem to be in a transition from a mainly extractive economy to a sustainable one, it still is fairly largely based on tourism or even eco-tourism, and you've got to get there for that to work. So what does he think about the Costa Rican model?
Thank you, Steve. Diego, could you kindly translate for Dario?
Yes. Dario, pregunta a Steve ¿qué piensas del modelo de Costa Rica? Costa Rica, al parecer, quiere pasar de su economía actual a una economía basada en el turismo o turismo verde y un turismo sostenible. ¿Sabes algo de ello? ¿Qué piensas?
Fíjate que conocemos parte de la experiencia de Costa Rica y pienso que probablemente puede funcionar. Yo pienso que se pueden aprender de experiencias, sin embargo, es un punto que hay que fijarlo y estudiarlo de manera bien objetiva. Por lo general, nuestros países acostumbran a estar copiando modelos y muchas veces no responden a las condiciones socioeconómicas y ambientales de cada una. Por lo tanto, yo pienso que la experiencia de Costa Rica no la conozco a fondo como tal, los impactos que genera, la relación con el desarrollo local, porque lamentablemente en el turismo hay muchos intereses. Ahora entiendo que habrá que sistematizar una serie de modelos turísticos, pero debemos de tener conocimiento de que la política pública del turismo en nuestros respectivos países son impuestas justamente por la oligarquía. Y dentro del marco del capitalismo el tema es ganar y ganar. O sea, poco importa la visión ética de los impactos que genera a los recursos naturales y sobre todo cómo aportar al desarrollo de las comunidades. Costa Rica en los últimos tiempos tiene un liderazgo.
Espera un momento que Diego
Sí.
va a decir.
No pasa nada.
Translation because...
Escúchame, Diego.
Tranquilo, más o menos. In summary, he welcomes the experience or the trial. He thinks it might work, but he's tired of seeing countries in the global south, specifically in the Caribbean, who copy a model from the global north or try out models that are based on the global north and are not really adapted to the circumstances. So he believes that we should take, or the countries in the Caribbean should take an objective perspective and try to really see if this may work, try to analyze it, and take into account that most of these models are based on a capitalism vision or a capitalist thinking of extractivism and always making more and more profit.
De todos modos, en la Estrategia Nacional de Desarrollo, donde los sectores dominantes de la República Dominicana han querido llegar al 2030, sitúan la posibilidad de una perspectiva mucho más sostenible y diversificar el turismo hacia una posición más sustentable. Pero eso está en el dicho, en el hecho resta mucho, hay mucha distancia producto incluso de las debilidades de la normativa nacionales en términos legales.
The plans for the sustainability plans for 2030 are very beautiful, but in practice they vary from, reality varies a lot from the theory.
Thank you.
Gracias.
In the meantime, there has been some more discussion going on the chat. So I will read out Sarah's position. Sarah, you've been wondering whether the ethos of Black Lives Matter that is being so extensively discussed at present could help stay grounded to increase awareness of the exploitative impacts of tourism. This is not generally discussed. Tourism is sold to us as being an unquestioned good all around. To show the aviation sector as being part of the process of putting global South countries into a fragile position would help raise awareness about the negative impacts of the sector. And Todd agrees, because 80 to 90% of the world's people have never even stepped foot on an aircraft. It's an extremely privileged activity. And then there, Alexander Araya, you are from Costa Rica, but say that we need a whole seminar to talk about these differences between the discourse in ecotourism and the reality of tourism extractivism. That's very interesting. Do you want to add anything? You want to share some sentences about that?
Great, so please go ahead.
Maybe not a whole seminar, but just...
No, hi. I normally try not to say much. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think that Costa Rica has a very long history of targeting like this market of ecotourism, which it works in some sense. Like they have built an extensive brand based on the need of attracting the people who are interested in conservation. But like not unlike Dominican Republic, we have sometimes hotel developments that they try to be doing some kind of land grabbing, for example. So you have a hotel that is close to the forest, and then they just expand into the jungle. And the government sometimes is like quite effective at regulating this, and sometimes it comes and say that the hotel, okay, you have to destroy the pools and the additional rooms that you created in this area because it's a national park and it's protected. And that happens a lot. Then there is a lot of discussion about the future of the cruise industry. That is another monster compared with the aviation industry. So there's basically no criticism in the cities, in the ports, Punta Arenas and Limon, that are constantly creating a dependency with tourism that comes with cruise industry. So while in Europe, we discuss a lot of microparticles and the contamination of the air, the water, etc., in relation to the cruise industry, we don't have these talks in impoverished communities in Costa Rica. I don't think we have them in the Caribbean as a whole region. And then you will have other specific issues on local communities. For example, in Guanacaste, that is really popular for the beach and surfing and whatever. There's a lot of hotels that have huge hotel development with golf courses. So you will have water being used for keeping the green grass of the golf course green, while the local community has no access to water. And I know that this sometimes is similar to what happens, for example, with energy distribution in Dominican Republic, when we have like Punta Cana, that people in the local communities don't get like energy provided by the local company of energy. So they get the energy that is state paid. So they will have like shortages, while the hotel industry gets like private produced companies. So they allow a 24/7 flow of energy. So this kind of problems, we also have them in Costa Rica, and it's a really lot complex to cover, but we are working like better maybe with sustainability, but we are not, we are very far from being balanced. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really good to have your input here too, in order to know that not like, yeah, also the ecotourism model maybe is also sometimes just greenwashing, I guess. So I wonder if like, how could such a just transition also in regions that are dependent on flights, on cruise ships, on tourism, how could this work? Like, if money flows don't come from tourism that much anymore, how could an economy be built up that is resilient and just? And I do think that that we have to bring in this perspective of climate justice there, because it is true that the global north has a very large historic responsibility for emissions and also for the destruction of a lot of economies with this very extractive model and extracting the yeah, richness, do you say that in English? Extracting wealth from the global south. How it is described in the open veins of Latin America, in a very known book in Latin America, but I guess you can also say that for a lot of other continents. So this maybe brings us to the topic of how can this such a just transition be financed, and which role does ownership take? Because I do have, I would like to know your opinion on proposals like, what if the profits made by destructive industries like airlines, if they are put into a just transition fund, which would be managed by workers, by communities affected, and by civil society, in order to then have this money be directed into a just transition, meaning into investments of renewable transport in the global north, but also in the diversification of economies in the global south, like giving money to, for example, the Dominican Republic, and how this is used is not decided by the global north, but is decided by the communities in these countries in order to really rebuild an economy. I mean, this would be an ideal vision for me, and I guess it is very visionary, but we have to be visionary in order to really prevent climate crisis. So I would like to hear your opinions on that, and maybe Mira, in order to go into this discussion now, could you maybe bring up the slide with the questions we have? Thank you. So would be great to know your opinion on what I just proposed, and maybe it goes into this direction also of of the last question, how do we ensure just transition for countries dependent on tourism, but also into this question, the first question, what role should private versus public ownership be? Because like the question is how do we guarantee that profits are not diverted into private stakeholders owning the companies, but rather into this transition? Are there any opinions on that?
Todd has raised his hand before.
Okay, great.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great idea, by the way. You know, we totally need to be helping these economies. And I was just going to bring it to current times. You know, I was at a reparations rebellion protest on Saturday, and it was, you know, the South African people who you know, are demanding reparations for the, you know, the indigenous communities. And, you know, in 2015, we were still paying off slave owners, and, you know, somehow we should, along with COVID, you know, we've got all this debt wrapped up in Africa, and we're just, you know, we should, you know, really be cancelling this debt and supporting the global South in that way, looking at historic, you know, our role in history. And yeah, this is kind of separate to what you were talking about, but yeah, I totally agree that moving forward, we should be helping the countries financially as part of our just transition. Yeah.
Thank you, Chad. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
I don't know, Dario, did you understand also my questions? Diego, were you able to translate a bit in the chat, or shall we?
It's been everything.
Thanks a lot. Dario, ¿tienes una perspectiva, una opinión sobre lo que planteé de cómo se podría quizás financiar una transición justa también en el sur global?
Bueno, lo que ha sido la dinámica en nuestros países frente a la industria turística y de aviación ha sido sobre la base de políticas liberales de impuestos. Y la liberación de impuestos. En el caso de la transición justa, al interior de las autoridades por lo menos se firman acuerdos, se firman declaraciones sobre la preocupación, sobre todo en el área de combustible. O sea, en el caso dominicano, en el 2016, el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, la autoridad que tiene que ver con aviación civil, se plantearon que al 2020, a partir del 2020, tenía la necesidad de reducción de CO2, pero además de eso, del uso de combustible sostenible para la aviación. Pero eso son declaraciones, más de ahí no pasa. Entonces yo pienso que el problema de la transición justa tiene que darse también sobre la base de crearse capacidades y un nivel de sensibilidad. En este momento, en la agenda de las políticas públicas, no tiene una prioridad este tipo de discusión, porque necesariamente la transición se ve afectada con intereses. Y puedo poner ejemplo, o sea, en este momento...
pausa
¿sí?
para traducción, quizás.
Siempre se me olvida.
Gracias.
No pasa nada. So to summarize, there's always a lot of talk at the governmental level about having to reduce CO2 emissions and taking on climate change, but in the end, these are just declarations and nothing is really being done. The just transition discourse is against the mainstream thinking in the country and the political elites, so it's not so easy to really bring in this topic into the debate. More or less, that was the summary. Puedes seguir, pero...
O sea que es un tema que tiene que ser introducido para el debate y generar un gran amplio movimiento de opinión pública.
There's a chance to bring this topic into the general public and really start something out of it.
Recientemente el país acaba de inaugurar, para citar un ejemplo de la incoherencia, una planta eléctrica a carbón cuando tiene compromisos internacionales con productos fósiles. O sea, en esta misma semana.
Just to highlight the madness of the discourse, or how the government says one thing but does the opposite. This week, a new power plant has been inaugurated.
Just like in Germany.
En el caso de aviación, independientemente de la importancia que tiene el turismo, el país desde hace más de 30 años no tiene una línea nacional.
¿A qué te refieres con línea nacional?
Una compañía del Estado, pública de aviación.
Yeah. The country has no public airline since 30 years.
O sea, a pesar de que existía Dominicana de Aviación como una línea bandera, entre comillas, del orgullo nacional, la corrupción desató, o sea, llevó a la quiebra a la compañía.
The national airline went into bankruptcy around 30 years ago, and it was a sign of that people were proud about it.
Además, los inconvenientes que presentan los aeropuertos internacionales para las líneas locales o nacionales.
Perdona, ¿me puedes repetir?
Los inconvenientes, los obstáculos, o sea, la exigencia de calidad que exigen los aeropuertos internacionales para las líneas locales.
There are many obstacles or there are many requirements that international airlines and companies require for local airports in Dominican Republic.
O sea, el tema de la transición justa es fundamental, pero hay que introducirla a la agenda del debate.
The just transition debate is really important, and it needs to be brought into the main debate, to the public debate. Yeah.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dario and Diego. Simone has raised her hand before, and then I have Tahir.
Yeah, sorry, I think Dario actually already made some of the points. Just to caution a little bit about the idea of a fund, I think we should always be a little bit careful with these kind of, in the end, capitalist suggestions, because any fund will depend on capital. And for generating that capital, you need more capitalism. And of course, one of the issues about the whole transition in the tourist and aviation sector is that especially tourism brings a lot of money into governmental funds as well. And you can see that, for example, here in Amsterdam, where on the one hand, a lot of citizens are very happy about the decline in tourism, but the municipal government, which actually has quite some very nice plans for a just transition to circular economies, is also faced with the dilemma that it is having very little funding to do that because it's now missing out on some 10 billion a year in tourism incomes. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for just transition that don't require money. It's much more a matter of, as Dario said, changing the model and focusing on other development models and ensuring that the money that is there is invested into sustainable livelihoods rather than the classic development model. And very often, if you just take away the subsidies and investments in the wrong model, space will be created for a more sustainable model. And you don't need a lot of extra money to it because, yeah, the problem is that money will always come, on the one hand, with this question of, so how do you generate so much money? And then it always comes with power. It's sympathetic to think that the decisions will be made by the communities, but if Mr. A gives money to Mr. B, Mr. A will always have more power than Mr. B. I mean, that's just the law of nature. So yeah, I think we should be a bit careful of, especially funds, but in general, look for solutions that don't require a lot of money, basically, a lot of capital, just to redivide power also.
Thank you, Simone. Tahir has raised his hand next, and we have some comments from Sarah in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking about the first paragraph in your slide showing there about the distribution of private and public ownership. Of course, one of the things is that over the last 40 years, you know, it has become the orthodoxy really to think that private is better and that therefore everything must be privately owned and deregulated and liberalised. And the aviation industry is probably the most, well, one of the most extreme examples of that. So it's a long, long way from where we want it to be, and it's not easy to try and bring it back. But I mean, one of the things that has come about as a result of the pandemic is that the trade unions, certainly in the UK, who are very much pro-expansion and pro-private ownership, even some of them are now starting to think about at least partial public ownership of parts of the aviation industry. So there is a move in the right direction there. I think the difficulty is that we don't have the right kind of government, certainly in the UK and probably everywhere else as well, to really grasp this with the kind of political will that's needed. It needs to be driven from below by people in communities, towns, cities and regions. But that's not particularly conducive when it comes to aviation. I mean, other forms like energy and so on, you can actually do that and visualize a model that would actually work. But for aviation, because it's national, it's international, even very difficult to see anything other than nationalisation. And where we are at the moment, we are a long, long way from that. But it really needs to be driven from below by conversations like this, because the government, certainly our government and many others, are not going to come to it willingly, I think.
Thank you, Tahir. Sarah in the chat wrote that she's wondering whether, as many have been demanding, the price of air travel rises significantly, it will cut the number of flights. That might mean people take fewer holidays though they spend more on them. That might mean as much money goes to the destination country, or it might not. Perhaps countries would be happy to have half as many tourists if they spend twice as much each compared to before. But there would be fewer jobs available, hotels, tourism generally, if half as many people visit, even if they are spending twice as much. Are we keen to increase the costs of flying with the consequence of fewer tourists? And then Sarah also added, in the UK, the airports that are owned by local authorities, for example, Manchester, Stansted, East Midlands, Luton, are no better than the ones privately owned. Their owners are just as keen for their airports to make as much money as possible as are private owners. And Todd commented, flying should still remain accessible. I like this idea, but it should perhaps be driven through a frequent flyer tax levy so that it focuses on the elites. So these were the comments from the chat. Are there further comments from other participants? I see that there's a second user also joining via phone. So in case you want to raise your voice, just unmute yourself and say hand. Hans has written in the chat, the question is, to what point frequent air traffic is compatible with the biophysical limits of the planet?
So maybe I step in if there's not another question. Okay, there's Hans. Yes, please.
Just to further elaborate on the question, it would be nice if air traffic would be accessible from the point of the customer. Well, it would be nice, but it's actually not compatible with the limits of the planet. So I think that is the main problem, actually, when what we are talking about. The tourism question is very important because it means income for the countries like Portugal, for example. That is a destination for tourism, but actually we have to think it's not compatible with the biophysical limits of the planet, and that is, in my opinion, the main reason that we should reduce air traffic radically. And the question is, who can, if we make it just more expensive, who can access air traffic? Is that just from the point of view of the customer, or is it just from the point of view of the planet, or just from the point of view of the worker in the industry, or of the people that work in the tourism industry in the destination countries? I think that's the four questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. I see no further hands raised. Lena, you wanted to step in?
Yes. So I think there was important points raised. So if biophysical limits don't allow for more flights, or it is clear that we need a reduction, then this would mean that tourism, the way it is now, would need to change, definitely. So if we think this further, also from a perspective from the global north, from the ones who do most of the tourism, because that's also something that's very unequally distributed globally, maybe this the type of how we do tourism needs to change. Not so much a quick, cheap, far away holiday, but rather longer, maybe also a bit more expensive. I mean, it is no surprise that it is often cheaper to take a 2-week holiday in the Caribbean for Europeans than to take a 2-week holiday inside Europe, because of the global inequalities, and because it is so much cheaper to check into the all-inclusive hotel there than it is here, and to take a flight than to take a train. So if we realize that, then it's clear that a just transition is not just, it's not just implement a tax on flights and then everything will change, but it means that actually everything needs to change in order to if reducing aviation should make sense and should be embedded into systemic thinking. So I would like to in the last 5 or 10 minutes go a bit into this discussion of public ownership again, because Tahir, you said it is great that there is some more that unions also tend to be more in favor of at least partial public ownership or nationalization, while Sarah has raised the concerns that right now publicly owned airports, for example, are no better than privately owned ones. They are also embedded in the capitalist system. They also try to make profits. So how can, what is really better? That's also something we've asked ourselves in our working group, especially because there were also some concerns raised. Some said it is easier to manage such a just transition, to shift jobs if, for example, a state creates, instead of an airline and train company, creates one transport company, public transport company, and then inside this transport company it is a lot easier to shift jobs from for example aviation to public transport and trains, while others said it is actually good to use the crisis of the aviation industry and let some airlines go bankrupt, because we need less air travel and it's not a sustainable business model. So why nationalize it and basically make the loss public while they were able to do profits before? Why not just let them go bankrupt? So what do you think about this? Maybe Tahir, you have an opinion on that, and maybe others too.
Gosh, well, that's yeah. I think you've kind of said it really. In effect, I mean, I think the thing about Sarah's point about the publicly owned airports, so it's a fair point, but I think your characterisation of them as being embedded in the system is a very good one, because it does drive them to behave in the same kind of ways. So as long as that system is the one that is driving the whole industry, then they are going to behave in that particular way. In terms of public ownership, it is very difficult, because firstly, aviation is a long way from public ownership, and the point that I made about the unions is very much coming from the direction that most of them think that the industry we have now is doing quite well, and that's because it's in its own terms, it's quite successful, or has been up until the time of the pandemic, and so they themselves are relatively well rewarded compared to other parts of the workforce. So it's a very difficult case to make. But I think, yeah, it's a good point about the issue of nationalising the losses. I do understand this. So yeah, there is a case there to say, well, let these private companies run themselves into the ground, and then we will pick up the pieces, rather than do it now and have to pay a lot of money, which is taxpayers' money. But at the same time, we're not going to get to a kind of transport system that we need unless there is the intervention of at the state level of various states, which if we leave it to private actors, that is never going to happen. So there's also a case that actually in the long run we will be benefiting from it, because the nature of the society and the nature of the transport system and the impact on climate change, all those things will come about if we can take if the public takes ownership of those segments of the economy and gears them towards those goals. I think that's about, I've talked myself into the ground there, Lena.
Thank you, Tahir. Diego has also raised his hand. Diego? Apparently we have lost Diego. Well, then let's take Sarah first. Sarah?
I was just going to say, picking up what Tahir said, in the case of Luton, which owns its airport, the trouble is that Luton has now lost an enormous amount of money, and all the public services by Luton Council are now at risk. So actually having the airport, which is a very dodgy investment, as a key source of income hasn't done Luton any good at all. And they're struggling to pay for public services like, I don't know, whatever it is they pay for education or Meals on Wheels or care for the elderly, due to too much dependence on the airport.
Thank you, Sarah. Steve, I think you have unmuted yourself. Do you want to speak?
Steve, did you want to say anything?
Maybe not.
Okay.
Elena, may I say something?
Yeah. Who's speaking now?
I think it's Michael. Please go ahead.
Yes.
To your question of public ownership, I think first of all, something can be done without any question of ownership. For instance, as an example, the short flights only of the Berlin government employees and what is around them is 2 times of all the flies who came to Dominican Republic last year, as I saw the numbers. There were 200,006 short flies only made by the members of the administration and government in Berlin. So this is a question which could be stopped maybe by a law, maybe decision of people, whatever. It has nothing to do with the ownership. And I think we should be very carefully act with this question of ownership, as long we cannot integrate it in um, our idea of future society. Yeah? The power for changing something in this sector is not only made by those people who have problems with climate and problems with aircraft. So I think it's a lot to do just to shorten flyings in the actual situation. And I don't know what's the situation in other countries, but I think in Germany, in short or long, we will make big campaigns against these short flying things. Many cities and counties have already fixed it, and that our personnel is not allowed to fly under 600 kilometers. That's all.
Pat?
Okay, Steve, please go ahead.
And Diego is back now, so.
Okay, thanks. I'll have him on the list next. Steve, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think it's slightly dangerous ground to get sucked down the nationalisation drain, if that's not a mixed metaphor. I mean, what we're talking about is an industrial sector that at best we want to shrink to being very tiny, if we follow the science. So whether or not it's controlled by the state, and let's be honest, state records of controlling anything aren't great, and it depends on the state. Whether it's controlled by the state or the workers or some other form of public ownership, what we need, obviously, is to transition those jobs out of that industry. So if we're just talking about nationalisation, then are we really talking about that, or are we talking about perpetuating that sector that we need to shrink to a tiny size? So although it's something that we need to decide and reach agreement on some sort of strategy with regard to public ownership, I'd shy away from actual state nationalisation, and I think it's just it's an aside, really. We want to get rid of it, basically, and move those workers into more meaningful work.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Diego, you raised your hand before we lost you. Do you want to speak now?
My computer collapsed for some reason. I am actually, sorry, yeah?
Sorry, just straight your back.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm actually diametrically opposed to what Steve thinks. If you look at the financial history of capitalism, nowhere in the last 50 years when a company has collapsed, the government has allowed it to collapse, which means governments always pick up the tab. So my question is, do they pick up the tab now and have the highest amount of levy to really move workers from the airline sector to other sectors? Or does the government pick up the tab in 10 years or 15 or 20? What we've seen so far during Corona is that most countries, at least in the global north, there's been a lot of public money going straight to the pockets of airlines. I think by having stake at least 50%, or sorry, 51% on airline companies, then they have a good say on it, and they can say, okay, enough of the shit. We need to start really moving jobs, and we're going to do it at this rate of 10% of the workforce per year. And if they go unemployed, then the government will pay anyway for the unemployment benefits. So that's really my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Diego.
So Diego, just one question. You're arguing basically for a mixture of private and public.
As a minimum, yes.
To have some more public democratic control in the decisions of like and in order to be able to better put conditions on the companies.
As a minimum.
Yes.
But I also think that in some cases 100%, if it's accepted by the public and unfortunately by the financial markets, then it might make sense too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks a lot. We are now coming to the end of our webinar. Mira, there's no one on the list anymore, right?
No.
Okay, so I would just like to already invite you to feedback on this webinar. I will post the link in the chat, but maybe also it would be great to have a very short wrap up of the webinar. Maybe some of the speakers would like to share some last thoughts on the webinar and your like lessons learned or your ideas of how to move forward and what would be important. So maybe we would start with Ali, if you want.
Yeah, thanks so much to all the speakers and everyone who took part. That was really, really interesting. I think for me, a key takeaway is that although we do obviously really want to reduce levels of flying, we also need to think about the impact that will have in countries which are dependent on tourism. And it's really, really important to factor that in and not just think about the impacts here on aviation workers, even though that is really important as well. I think that's my key takeaway from the session.
Thank you. Todd, do you want to be next?
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for all the input, everyone. I've certainly been paying a lot of attention. And it's really important to understand the impact of what we require. And yeah, also it's just been an interesting discussion around nationalisation as well. I don't really fully understand my position on that, but I'm open to learning more. But yeah, I know that we just need more airline workers to understand. I think that's the key thing for me is just, airline workers are educated people, and it's just allowing them to access that information and to connect those dots. So yeah, thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Tahir? What are your
yeah, well, thank you. Excellent session, Lena, as always. I'd say, yeah, two brief points, really. One is that I think in terms of the various topics that we covered, the one that, the issue about tourism and ecotourism and the various players in that, I think is one that seems to be well worth expanding on at some future point, because there's an awful lot to talk about there, which we really only scratched the surface of. And it is fascinating just in terms of how we build a global movement, that we do need to take account of that. I think the other thing, and I must admit, I always come away from sessions like this thinking this, but I think even more so today, is that there are so many good ideas and good campaigns going on out there that is absolutely vital. We do have a kind of organising mechanism like Stay Grounded, for example, to actually bring all those together into a coherent whole, because there are when you hear from people at meetings, there are so many good ideas being expressed and so many things going on in different parts of the world that we really need to bring them together to form the kind of movement that we're trying to build. So thank you again, and really good, really well done, everybody.
Thank you, Tahir. Dario, would you like to say some final words? What were your key takeaways?
Pienso, para nosotros los dominicanos, el tema del turismo y la discusión es de vital importancia. Y aunque no tengo mal corazón sobre algo que se ha dicho, no le deseo mal a nadie, pero si quiebran las empresas de aviación, aunque no me alegraría, pero creo que sería una alternativa. Sobre Diego.
Sí, he doesn't want to do anything bad to anybody, but if he saw some of the airline companies go bankrupt, he thinks that could be a possibility of progress.
El tema del turismo para los dominicanos es un tema de unidad nacional. Y no se rían.
The topic of tourism, or tourism itself, is a topic of national proudness in the country.
O sea, desde el 2006, el informe de desarrollo humano que realiza desde el gobierno se planteaba la preocupación de la sostenibilidad del turismo, donde incluso la transición era un tema en esa época.
Already in 2006, the government was talking about sustainability and the transition of the tourist sector.
Pero es una visión de los técnicos, no necesariamente de los tomadores de decisiones políticas.
It's a technical decision, not really a political one.
Introducir el tema de la transición en este momento es de vital importancia, pero asumiendo de cómo generar impacto, de generar alianza, crear alianzas.
Bringing this topic of just transition into the debate is very important, and specifically it is also vital to engage in alliances and to come together as an environmental movement.
O sea, de cómo generar un proceso de opinión pública favorable.
How to reach a positive opinion from the public regarding this topic is very important.
Porque justamente en esa importancia que tiene el turismo, aquí hay más de 15 universidades que tienen facultades sobre temas de administración hotelera, de turismo y administración hotelera.
There's more than 15 universities in the country that have some kind of department regarding tourism management. So it's a really vital economy, or part of the economy.
Veamos también que el turismo depende también de centros de poderes internacionales.
Tourism depends on international multinationals and therefore international power.
Hace alrededor de un año que se armó una campaña internacional en contra del turismo en República Dominicana.
Around a year ago, there was an international campaign against tourism in the country.
Si era justa o no, puede estar en discusión, pero la verdad fue que parte del dinero del erario público, el Ministerio de Turismo tuvo que contratar compañías internacionales para posicionar y clarificar la problemática.
Whether the debate was about just or not a just tourist sector, in the end, the government had to contract international companies to make sure that the tourist sector was clearly defended and well positioned in the debate.
Es un tema que mueve mucho a la epidermis, y, o sea, que molesta dependiendo de cómo se trate.
It's a very sensible topic.
En la semana pasada, la revista británica Vogue publicó en primera plana una fotografía de una playa llena de basura en República Dominicana.
Last week, the Vogue magazine published a picture of a beach in Dominican Republic with full of trash.
Sorry, can you please come to an end because it's already past the
Que se
time.
puede la gente tiene que marcharse, si puede resumir tu último punto.
¿Cómo es?
Que la gente se tiene que marchar, que son las 6 ya aquí. Que si puedes acabar resumiendo un poquito lo que estás diciendo.
La intención es que hay que crear herramientas necesarias para cualificar un debate nacional.
Okay, there needs to be a discussion to ensure that the debate about the just transition at a national level can be effective.
E identificar otras áreas potenciales para el desarrollo nacional. Muchísimas gracias.
And look for other areas to develop the local economy. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So yes, there has to be a lot more debate on local, national, international levels. And we will keep in touch on this. As we said, we will write in a collective process discussion paper on just transition in order to have like our vision like written down, which can then serve for further discussions. So if you would like to participate in this process of writing this paper, then you can write me an email. I just posted my email address into the chat. Yes, thanks a lot for joining this webinar. Thanks to the speakers again. And we might see each other again in our next webinar next month, which will be a discussion on do we need taxes on flights or rather limits on flights? So I just want to remind you now to please fill in this feedback form, because this will help us to analyze our webinar and see how we can do better the next time. And I wish you a good evening or good day wherever you're based. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.